They thought he was just a quiet Marine veteran living with his loyal German shepherd in the snowy mountains of Montana, until the sky above Skyhaven split open with the roar of 8 enemy jets hunting a young pilot barely clinging to life. No orders came, no reinforcements arrived, and in that moment of silence, Elias Calhoun made a choice that broke every rule he once lived by. He launched into an old AT-6, driven not by duty, but by a promise he made long ago, to never let another life slip through his fingers. Beside him, Coda sensed danger in the air long before any radar screamed, guiding Elias straight into a valley where instinct fought metal and fate balanced on a blade. The chase that followed twisted through frozen cliffs, where a single mistake meant death, and where a Marine and his dog uncovered a plot darker than the storm they were flying through. Every turn, every dive, every breath dragged them deeper into a truth no one at Skyhaven was prepared for, one that would change the future of the base forever. And before we continue, tell me, where do you think this story truly began? If this hooked you, like, comment, and subscribe to follow the rest of the journey. The first snow of Brightwood felt like a whisper that didn't want to disturb the world. It drifted slowly over the northern Vermont town, across its quiet streets, over the maple trees fading from amber to bare branches, and onto the frozen lake where winter always arrived first. From a distance, Brightwood looked like a postcard, peaceful, small, predictable. But Staff Sergeant Caleb Rowan had learned long ago that peaceful places were often the ones hiding the darkest truths. Caleb stepped out of his truck and felt the crisp air bite gently at his face. At 35, he had the appearance of a man forged by discipline and weathered by long stretches of silence in hostile places. His build was unmistakably Marine, broad shoulders beneath his Marpat combat jacket, arms toned not by gym machines, but by years of carrying packs and weapons through rough terrain. His dark brown hair was trimmed short, the sides marked with the first signs of gray, silver threads near the temples. A short, rugged beard framed his jaw, and his gray-blue eyes scanned the snowy road ahead with the slow, methodical calm of someone who never stopped assessing threats. Beside him, Atlas jumped down onto the snow, the 4-year-old German shepherd's paws landing without a sound. Atlas's sable coat, black along the spine, fading into deep gray, contrasted sharply against the white ground. A pale triangular patch of fur on his chest caught the soft morning light. His tactical harness, matte black, with a subdued USMC K9 patch, sat snugly along his muscular frame. The dog's amber eyes narrowed slightly as he lifted his nose into the cold air, reading scents the way other creatures read landscape. Caleb rested a gloved hand on Atlas's neck. "Easy, boy. We're just scouting." But Atlas wasn't convinced. His ears twitched, tracking something invisible. Caleb couldn't blame him. 5 children had gone missing in Brightwood over the past 2 months, all under 12. All vanished without a trace, and all their families reported one strange thing, a message from an anonymous number telling them not to call federal authorities. The locals believed the children wandered off or got lost in the woods, but Caleb knew better. Children don't vanish in neat, silent patterns, not unless someone understands how to erase footprints. He walked along the snowy path that led to Miller's Field, where the latest missing child, 9-year-old Ethan Wilder, was last seen. The field looked innocent enough, a stretch of white, bordered by frostbitten birch trees, the remnants of kids' footprints still visible in the snow. But Caleb's gut tightened the moment he stepped onto the field. Atlas stopped walking. The dog's body stiffened, tail lowering. His nose swept left, then right, then froze, locked onto something unseen. "What is it?" Caleb whispered. Atlas took one step forward, then another, his paws almost silent on the snow. He approached a spot, near the tree line where the snow was scuffed, as though someone had stumbled or been dragged. He sniffed, then pulled back sharply, sneezing in alarm. Caleb crouched, brushing the snow aside. Beneath it lay a faint stain, something pale blue, chemical, A sedative? He touched his fingertips to it. Cold. Fresh. Damn it, he murmured. They were here. Atlas emitted a low, vibrating growl. This wasn't a runaway. The moment the snow shifted, a sudden breeze pushed across the field, stirring loose powder into a swirling sheet. Atlas's head snapped upward, his ears erect, his gaze locked toward the woods. Then Caleb saw it too. A figure, just for a second. A tall silhouette standing between the birch trunks. Perfectly still. Too still. The kind of stillness only trained people could hold. The snow shifted again. The figure disappeared. Not walked. Not faded. Gone. Caleb's breath slowed. Atlas's growl deepened into something primal, a warning only a dog could give. Someone was watching them. And whoever it was, they knew what they were doing. Caleb scanned the trees, his hand moving instinctively toward the sheath where his folding blade sat hidden beneath his jacket. His eyes measured branches, shadows, footprints. Nothing. No breaks in the snow. No disturbed bark on tree trunks. No thermal haze of breath lingering in the cold. He straightened slowly. "Let's keep moving," he murmured, though something cold had settled behind his ribs. They followed the path around the lake, the water beneath the thin ice shifting darkly like an eye half open. Brightwood Lake was beautiful this time of year, at least it used to be. Now it felt like a stage set without actors, waiting for something terrible to walk across it. As Caleb approached the old dock, Atlas veered suddenly to the left. His tail stiffened. His posture lowered to a cautious crouch. Not fearful, but deeply uneasy. The dog nudged something beneath the snow with his nose, then stepped back, gaze fixed on Caleb. "What did you find?" Caleb knelt and brushed away the snow. A bracelet, small, wooden, a child's, perfectly preserved, except for one broken string. At its center was a tiny carved pendant, the letter V. The carving was too precise for a child's handiwork. The edges were clean, machine-made. And as Caleb lifted it into his palm, he felt something impossible. It was warm. Not warm like a leftover from a coat pocket. Warm like someone had been holding it minutes ago. Atlas whined anxiously, pacing in a tight circle, a behavior Caleb knew well. Not fear, not confusion. Anxiety, as if Atlas was sensing something he couldn't explain. Caleb swallowed. "Easy, boy." But he wasn't talking to Atlas anymore. He was talking to himself. He looked across the lake, toward the dense northern woods. The snow had begun falling faster, the flakes growing heavier, tumbling thickly from the sky, as though the whole town was being covered in white secrecy. Caleb pocketed the bracelet, its strange warmth lingering in his glove. This wasn't the first carved V he had seen in his life. 6 years ago, during a covert operation along the Afghan border, a rogue federal agent, Elias Crowler, had left these symbols behind like breadcrumbs before the mission that ended in fire. Crowler had been declared dead. Caleb had attended the funeral. But Caleb had also seen Crowler's body in the flames, and had always felt something was off. "Ghosts don't carve fresh letters in the snow," Caleb muttered. Atlas nudged his arm gently as if trying to ground him. Caleb exhaled and stood. The day had grown darker, the sky folding into heavy gray. If someone was hunting children here, they were leaving signs, inviting him into the game. He looked down at Atlas. "We're not leaving, buddy," he whispered. "Not until we find whoever took those kids." Atlas pressed his head against Caleb's leg, the closest thing he ever gave to a promise. Together, they turned away from the lake. As they walked back toward town, Caleb felt the weight of the bracelet in his pocket, each step echoing with the same realization. He and Atlas were no longer observers. They were already inside the hunt. And somewhere in Brightwood, buried under snow and silence, the next move was coming. Night settled over Brightwood with the slow heaviness of winter clouds, swallowing the small town's warm lights until only the faint glow of porch lamps dotted the streets like isolated fireflies. Caleb Rowan walked through the snow, in near silence, the familiar weight of his marpat jacket cutting the wind that stung against his cheeks. Atlas moved beside him, the 4-year-old shepherd's breath forming soft clouds in the frigid air, paws crunching rhythmically as they followed the narrow trail toward the abandoned lumber mill. The building loomed against the tree line as a block of darkness, tall, weathered boards warped by decades of cold seasons. In daylight, it looked deserted. At night, it resembled something the world had forgotten on purpose. Caleb paused several yards away, letting the quiet settle. His gray-blue eyes scanned the roofline, the windows, the doors, every place a trained man might hide. Atlas's ears angled forward. He stood perfectly still, the dark sable of his coat blending into shadow, except for the faint snowy flecks caught on his back. The dog's tail lowered a fraction, signaling uncertainty, but not fear. Caleb touched the old watch on his wrist, a grounding habit, as though the pulse of its ticking could line up his breath with the cold, disciplined calm he had learned over years in combat. "Stay close," he whispered, and they approached the mill. Inside, the air held the dry scent of aging timber mixed with something recent: metal, sweat, and faint chemical residue. Caleb turned on his flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through swirling dust like a blade. The interior, vast and skeletal, was littered with old saws and conveyor belts left behind when the mill shut down. Atlas stepped ahead, nose low, each breath deliberate. He followed a scent trail toward the far wall, something human, young, frightened. Caleb followed the dog and then saw something that made him stop. On the wall, just above eye level, was a mark drawn in charcoal, a V, simple, sharp-edged, deliberate. As Caleb lifted the flashlight, more marks revealed themselves, some high, some low, some partially rubbed away by time or by hands brushing past. Dozens of V's scattered across the cracked wood, layered from different periods. Some were faint gray, likely years old. Others were darker, newly drawn. A map? A trail? Or a signal between captor and captive? His stomach tightened. Whoever was using this mill had been here long before Brightwood's children started disappearing. Atlas approached a pile of old planks, sniffing intensely. He nudged one with his nose, then pawed at the floor. Caleb cleared the debris and found a small hatch, rusted metal barely holding its hinges. He opened it slowly, revealing a shallow storage pit beneath the floorboards. A stale smell rushed out. Mold, old fabric, and something unmistakable. Chemical sedative. Atlas growled softly, the fur along his spine rising. Caleb crouched beside the pit and scanned the contents. A piece of torn fabric lay atop the debris, faded blue with a stitched patch of a cartoon rocket ship. A child's sleeve. He turned it over gently, noticing the frayed edge where it had been ripped straight through. His jaw tightened. No child tears fabric like that. "Someone was held here," he murmured. "Not long ago." Atlas shifted suddenly, muscles bunching beneath his harness. His eyes tracked something in the dark, his posture alert but strangely hesitant, like he sensed a presence he couldn't quite pinpoint. Caleb followed the dog's stare, but saw nothing except shadows cast by pillars and broken machinery. He stood, pulling the sleeve from his pocket and folding it carefully. As he did, his phone buzzed once inside his jacket. No ringtone, just a vibration, like a tap on the shoulder from an unseen hand. Unknown number, a single message. "Don't search the old way. He already knows your strengths." Caleb stared at the words, feeling a cold settle deeper than the temperature around him. The phrasing was precise, almost intimate. Whoever sent it knew him, not as a Marine on leave, but as the man he was during Black Zone operations. The kind of man who relied on silence, instinct, and patience carved from grief and duty. He scanned the upper rafters again, slower this time. Atlas mirrored him, the dog's eyes cutting through darkness in gleaming amber arcs. Nothing moved, yet the message felt close. Too close. He typed nothing back. Responding gave the sender what they wanted: reaction, Rhythm, timing to measure. Atlas suddenly jerked his head toward the mill's northwest corner and bolted. Not wildly, he never behaved wildly, but with a forced urgency. Caleb sprinted after him, boots pounding on the warped floorboards until they reached the dusty corner where stacks of old plywood leaned like crooked tombstones. Atlas sniffed rapidly, then froze. There, small shoe prints, fresh, pressed into a thin layer of dust, a child's size, the pattern crisp. Caleb crouched, examining them. "Ethan Wilder?" he whispered, thinking of the boy missing since last morning. Atlas lowered his body, tail tucked halfway, nose drifting toward a faint trail leading deeper behind the stacks. "I know," Caleb whispered. He reached for his flashlight, but before he could turn, his phone vibrated again. A photo this time. His breath caught. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, sat inside a metal container. Dirty cheeks, bright, frightened eyes, knees pulled to her chest. The lighting harsh enough to cast long, sharp shadows. The container door was half closed, and the steel surface acted like a mirror. In that reflection was a shape Caleb recognized instantly. Atlas, standing exactly where he stood now. Someone had taken the photo from inside this mill. Someone close enough to see the dog's silhouette at this very angle. A chill raced through Caleb's spine. Not fear. Something colder. Calculation. The realization that every step he had taken tonight had been observed, recorded, maybe even anticipated. He scanned the dark once more, slower, deeper, his breath forming faint clouds in the beam of his flashlight. Atlas pressed close to his leg, trembling, not from fear, but tension. His silent signal. We are not alone. Caleb shut off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed them. The sudden loss of light sharpened every sound. The distant drip of melted snow slipping through roof cracks, the soft rustle of Atlas adjusting his weight, the low hum of wind pushing against the wooden walls. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, letting his hearing stretch out to the edges of the room. A floorboard creaked somewhere above. Not loudly. Just enough. Someone moving. Slowly. Carefully. Atlas lifted his head, ears pinpointing the sound's direction. Caleb kept his breathing shallow and listened. The faint scrape of rubber on wood. A shift of weight. A soft exhale. Human, measured, intentional. Caleb spoke barely above a whisper. He's still here. Atlas leaned in close, silent but quivering with alertness. Caleb remained still, letting the darkness speak. Whoever was hiding knew the terrain, knew sound discipline, knew how to move like a shadow. He inhaled slowly, preparing for whatever came next. The mill felt alive now, breathing, watching, waiting. And somewhere in that thick blackness, the hunter took another quiet step. Caleb didn't turn on the flashlight again. He didn't move at all. He simply listened and waited. Snow muffled every sound in the Brightwood woods, turning the world into a pale, breathing silence broken only by the soft crunch beneath Caleb Rowan's boots. Atlas trotted slightly ahead, his dark sable coat blending into the night, except where moonlight caught the lighter triangle on his chest. The dog moved with quick, purposeful motions, tail low, ears flicking like radar dishes scanning for danger. The trail he followed was invisible to Caleb, but Atlas had locked onto something the moment they'd stepped out of the mill, something that smelled like dirt, sweat, and fear. Caleb kept one hand on the strap of his rifle, the other near his pocket where the torn fabric from the hidden pit now rested. His thoughts churned with an uneasy mix of anger and calculation. Someone had been inside the mill watching them. Someone disciplined, quiet, and well-trained. And now Atlas was leading him into deeper darkness, away from the relative safety of town, toward the unknown. The trees thinned as they pushed farther in until a clearing opened ahead. In the center stood a tall structure, white paint peeling in strips, the boards warped, roof sagging slightly. Locals called it the White Barn, though its size and cold, almost military symmetry made it look more like a forgotten research outpost than a barn. Atlas whined softly, an uncharacteristic tremor running through him. Caleb's voice was low. "Easy, buddy. Show me." The dog pushed forward and stopped at the barn door, pressing his nose against the crack as if urging Caleb to look. Caleb nudged the heavy door open, its rusted hinges groaning in protest. A cold draft spilled out, carrying a dry scent, dust, old paper, and something else, something human. Inside, the barn was nothing like a farm building. Wooden walls concealed reinforced steel beams. Old fluorescent light fixtures hung dead overhead. And lining the center of the room were wooden crates, neatly stacked, organized by numbers, dates, and handwritten names. But the strangest thing was the frost-coated labels affixed to each crate. Missing children. Years' worth. Caleb walked closer, reading some of the names. Hannah Pierce, Jonah Whitmore, Lucy Hall, all children from nearby towns who had vanished in the past decade. Cases brushed off as runaways or accidents. But here they were, each name written with unsettling precision. Near the back lay a crate different from the others. Newer wood, cleaner edges, the ink not yet faded by time. He knelt and brushed snowflakes off the tag. Emmett Collins' age, 10, taken. This morning, Caleb exhaled sharply, jaw tightening. He remembered Emmett's file, the boy with green eyes and slightly curled brown hair, often wearing a silver-gray hoodie. A boy flagged by federal systems as under quiet observation, because his father, Agent Michael Collins, had vanished during a covert operation 6 years ago. An operation Caleb himself had been part of until orders changed and Collins disappeared. The guilt had never fully left him. Caleb opened the crate. Inside were only a few items: a school notebook with messy handwriting, a small digital watch with a cracked strap, and a photo of Emmett smiling awkwardly beside a tall man with a trimmed beard and tired eyes. His father, a man who had once trusted Caleb with his son's safety. He closed the crate slowly. Atlas suddenly lifted his head, tail stiffening, nose pointing toward the far corner of the barn. Caleb followed his gaze and saw a hatch hidden beneath an overturned steel table. The hatch was old, Cold War era by the look, its metal scratched and dulled by decades, but the lock had been cut recently, the edges fresh and jagged. Caleb moved closer, kneeling to examine the floor around it. Dirt, freshly disturbed. A faint imprint of a boot, likely size 9 or 10. And a smell rising up from the hatch, earth, damp, and something faintly metallic. Atlas sniffed the edge, then stiffened, body rigid. Caleb whispered, "What is it?" Atlas didn't move. He just stared down the tunnel as if waiting for something to emerge. And then came the sound. A soft, muffled sob. A child's voice, weak, echoing through the dark tunnel. A sound that didn't belong in these woods or in any place a child should ever be. Caleb's breath stilled. The sobbing grew clearer, trembling like a small bird trapped in a metal cage. He stood and clicked on his flashlight, aiming the beam down the tunnel. Nothing. Only darkness. But the crying continued. He exhaled, preparing to descend the ladder. And just then, a signal in the dark Atlas suddenly growled. Not loud, but deep, almost hesitant. His gaze wasn't on the tunnel now. It was fixed behind Caleb, toward the upper beams of the barn. Caleb turned just enough to catch a reflection. 2 faint glimmers of light, like the eyes of someone holding perfectly still in the rafters. But when he snapped the flashlight upward, the space was empty. Atlas stepped back, ears flat, tail tucked slightly. Not fear, recognition. Like he had scented something he knew, something from before Brightwood, something from the past Caleb had tried to bury. The moment stretched, cold and heavy. Then the crying resumed below, more urgent now. Caleb swallowed hard. "Focus," he murmured, more to himself than the dog. One child at a time. He positioned himself at the tunnel's edge and climbed down the iron ladder, the metal cold enough to burn the skin through his gloves. Atlas waited above, whining softly, He hated small enclosed spaces. But halfway down, Caleb heard the soft thump of paws as the dog followed anyway, teeth clenched in determination. At the bottom, the tunnel widened into a narrow passage reinforced with concrete walls. Old cables snaked along the ceiling. Footprints, some small, some adult, marked the dirt floor. The crying echoed from farther down, drawing them deeper. They moved quietly, Caleb scanning corners, Atlas sniffing. Ahead. After several minutes, the passage veered left, and a dim light flickered faintly, like a dying bulb miles from civilization. They approached a steel door, half open, scraping softly in the draft. Behind it, the crying stopped. Caleb pushed the door gently. It opened into a small maintenance room, empty. Just an overturned chair, a broken toolbox, and muddy footprints leading out a second exit on the far side. The crying hadn't come from a child in the room. It had been played from a speaker lying on the floor, now crackling with static. A recording. Someone had wanted to lure them here. Caleb crouched and picked up the small speaker. On its side, written in black marker, "You're still too slow." Atlas let out a frustrated bark. Caleb scanned the room, heartbeat hardening into frustration edged with fear. Whoever had brought the children here knew Caleb's tactics, knew how he tracked, how he evaluated threats. And now, he was leading Caleb through these tunnels like a cruel game of chess. As Caleb moved toward the second exit, Atlas stiffened again, nose twitching rapidly. The dog scratched lightly at the ground. There, beneath a layer of dust and old hay, was a faint mark, a smeared V drawn hurriedly. And beside it, a single footprint, smaller than the others, a child's, Emmett's. Caleb traced it with his fingers, the cold earth biting against his skin. Atlas whined softly again, leaning his head against Caleb's shoulder as if trying to steady him. "We'll get him," Caleb whispered. "I swear it. I won't fail his father again." But before he could stand, a sudden metallic slam rang out in the passage behind them, loud, final, like a vault door sealing shut. The sound echoed through the tunnel system. They were no longer alone, and someone had just locked a door they hadn't even opened yet. Caleb rose slowly, rifle ready, heart steady but sharpening like a blade. Someone was controlling every move they made, someone who knew this place better than he did, someone who wanted Emmett alive. For now. Chapter 3 ended with more questions than answers, and Caleb understood one thing with bone-deep certainty. This wasn't just an abduction. It was a message. The tunnel stretched in front of Caleb Rowan like an artery carved into the earth. Old concrete walls damp with decades of neglect, pipes groaning above like skeletons shifting in their sleep. The air felt heavier the deeper he and Atlas descended, holding the cold the way a grave holds silence. Caleb's flashlight cut through the darkness in narrow slices, revealing rust-stained doors and faded signs from another era. Atlas stayed close, the big shepherd's ears pricked forward, breath slow and steady but tense. Each room they passed showed the same pattern: abandoned laboratory desks, shattered jars, medical trays warped by age. Someone had repurposed these rooms to serve a much darker purpose. Caleb felt his jaw clench as he inspected makeshift restraints bolted to walls, cables, cuffs, blankets folded neatly on cots too small for adults. He stepped into the largest chamber, the smell of cold metal stronger here. Atlas sniffed at a pile of blankets, then froze. His body stiffened, tail rigid, eyes locked on a shadowed corner behind a tipped metal shelf. Caleb approached with quiet steps, lowering his flashlight beam slowly. A girl, 8, maybe 9, sat curled into herself, legs drawn up, arms wrapped tightly around her chest. Her blonde hair was matted, tangled with dirt and dried blood. Bruises darkened her pale cheeks, and her lip was split, but her eyes, wide, brown, intelligent, tracked Caleb with wary focus. She wasn't unconscious. She was holding herself still on purpose, the way a child who's learned fear too early learns to become invisible. Caleb crouched. "Hey there," he said gently, voice steady and warm. "My name's Caleb. This is Atlas. We're here to help." Atlas lowered himself belly first, tail softening, head tilted, a gesture he reserved for frightened children. The girl blinked twice, tears catching in the grime on her face. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. She swallowed, voice barely air. "Lila." He offered her water, and she drank with trembling hands. When she finally spoke again, it was in short, broken pieces, like she was afraid someone was still listening. They need 7 kids," she whispered, "to move across, to sell. They said 7 is the number. They have enough now." Her voice cracked on the last word. Caleb's pulse tightened. Lila wasn't on any of the crates upstairs. She was new, freshly brought, freshly terrified. And that meant the others were still somewhere in this system. "Where are they keeping the rest?" he asked softly. Lila shook her head. "They split us. Some stayed, some went in the door, down where the machines are." "Machines?" She pointed weakly down the hall. Caleb checked her injuries, bruises, a few cuts, but nothing life-threatening. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light. Atlas walked closely alongside, head near her feet, guarding. They made it back toward the ladder without incident, though. The tunnel's silence felt unnatural now, heavy as if someone had inhaled right before striking. At the surface, the icy air hit them like a slap. Caleb set Lila on a fallen log, wrapped his jacket around her, and radioed for medical support. The nearest unit was 20 minutes out. Too long. He scanned the tree line again, checking every shadow. Something felt wrong. Wrong in the way a battlefield goes silent right before mortars fall. Atlas suddenly jerked back toward the tunnel entrance and barked. A deep, frantic bark he almost never used. Caleb spun. The warning no human could hear. Atlas didn't bark at shadows. He never wasted breath. But now he backed away, hackles lifting, nose wrinkling with instinctive dread. He wasn't looking into the tunnel. He was listening, head tilting sharply, ears twitching in rapid flutters. Then Caleb heard it. A faint mechanical whirring deep below. A ticking noise, not natural, not old, not accidental. Atlas growled once, a sound that meant run. Caleb didn't question it. He grabbed Lila in one motion and sprinted, boots tearing through the frozen ground. A heartbeat later, the earth shook beneath them. A thunderous roar split the night as flame and dust blasted upward from the tunnel mouth. The ground buckled, trees rattled, and a column of smoke erupted into the cold air like a volcanic exhale. The explosion was surgical, precise, timed, engineered, not intended to kill Caleb, intended to erase evidence, to collapse every room he hadn't yet reached. Atlas skidded on the snow, whimpering with rage and fear at the same time. Lila clung to Caleb's neck, coughing from smoke drifting across the clearing. Caleb turned his back to shield her from the debris showering down, his body instinctively forming a protective cage. When the shaking finally subsided, the entrance to the tunnel was gone. Not blocked, obliterated. Chunks of concrete and twisted rebar littered the clearing. The tunnel system was sealed under tons of earth. Atlas approached the rubble slowly, lowering his nose to the ground. He sniffed once, twice, then let out a soft, heartbroken whine. The other kids were still down there. Caleb set Lila on her feet. "Did you hear anything?" he asked her gently, though his own heart still pounded too loudly in his ears. She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "They said, if someone found us, they'd shut it down. They said, he knows everything." "Who's he?" Caleb pressed. Lila looked up at him, pupils dilated with terror. "The man with the scar. The one who watches from the dark. They said he used to be one of the good guys, but now he works for the shadows. A scarred man. Ex-military? Ex-intelligence?" Caleb's blood went cold. He knew only one man who fit that description. A man declared dead. a man Caleb had once trusted with his life. Atlas stepped in close, touching his nose to Caleb's hand, grounding him. Caleb turned toward the smoke-gray cloud rising from the buried tunnel. The cold wind blew it sideways, revealing the ruined entrance like an open wound on the earth. Lila whispered, "Are the others gone?" "No," Caleb said firmly, kneeling so his eyes met hers. "We don't leave kids behind. Not now, not ever." His voice held that marine steadiness, the tone forged in fire and loss. Lila nodded, believing him, not because she understood the danger, but because something in Caleb's voice sounded like truth. Paramedic sirens began echoing faintly through the forest. Caleb lifted Lila once more, carrying her toward the path where the rescue team would arrive. Atlas stayed behind for a moment, staring at the destroyed tunnel. Snowflakes landed on his fur, melting instantly. His tail hung low, but his eyes burned with something fierce, determination, almost human in its intensity. Caleb called him. The dog finally turned, but not before letting out one solemn bark toward the ruins, like a vow echoing into the earth. The past was awake again, and the man Caleb thought dead was now one step ahead, running this operation with professional precision. Time charges, misdirection, psychological traps. This wasn't a trafficking ring. This was a military mind gone rogue, a ghost Caleb had never wanted to see again. He looked back at the clearing one last time as medics rushed toward them. The tunnel was gone. The children were still trapped somewhere beneath. And the man behind it all had just sent Caleb a message written in dust and flame. "I'm still alive. Catch me, if you can." The snowfall had slowed to a soft, drifting curtain by the time Caleb Rowan reached the temporary command post, set up beside the collapsed tunnel entrance. Emergency vehicles painted the night in flashing red and blue. The smoke rising from the detonated underground chamber curled upward like ghosts escaping the earth. Caleb stood beside Atlas, his uniform dusted with ash, his muscles aching from the shockwave. Yet his mind was sharper than ever, focused, furious, and unbearably aware that the explosion hadn't been meant for him. It had been meant to erase evidence. And every second lost meant another child slipping farther away. Inside a heated tent, a medic finished tending to the rescued girl, a frail child with tangled chestnut hair, bruises darkening her thin arms, and amber eyes too haunted for someone so young. Her name was Mara Whiteley, age 9. Caleb watched her through the tent flap, noticing how her shoulders twitched at any sudden movement, as if expecting punishment. Mara was small, lean, with pale winter skin and freckles across her nose, the kind of child who might have once spent afternoons climbing trees or painting rocks by the river. Now she sat wrapped in a thick blanket, fingers gripping the edges tightly. When Caleb approached, she lifted her gaze slowly. "You're the soldier," she whispered, voice frayed like torn fabric. He nodded. "My name is Caleb. This is Atlas." The dog stepped forward, lowering his body and wagging his tail once, a soft, deliberate gesture he used for frightened children. Mara flinched at first, then stared as Atlas nudged his nose gently toward her knee. Her voice trembled. "We weren't supposed to talk. They said if one talked, all seven would be punished." Caleb crouched to meet her eye level. "Mara, I need to know, why 7? And why take you?" She hesitated, eyes darting away before she whispered, "It wasn't just about money. They said we were candidates for something called Vesper." Caleb's stomach tightened. Project Vesper. He had only heard the name twice, once in a classified briefing he hadn't been meant to see, and once from a dying agent whose final words were, "They're using children." But neither account contained anything concrete, just rumors of a Cold War-era program studying neural and sensory responses in high-stress conditions supposedly shut down decades ago. Caleb swallowed hard. "Who told you that name?" "One of the guards. He said my blood type made me a near match." Mara's voice cracked. "But Emmett. They kept saying Emmett was a perfect match." The temperature in the tent suddenly felt colder. Caleb forced himself to breathe evenly. Where did they take him? Mara shook her head. I don't know the name. They just called it the V Camp. Before Caleb could ask more, Mara's body jerked involuntarily, her eyes widening as though she remembered something terrible. The man who took him. He wasn't like the others. He moved different, like he already knew the place, like he wasn't afraid. Caleb leaned closer. Did you see his face? No, only his boots and gloves, and, she hesitated, a patch on his belt. It looked scratched, but I saw a letter, an S. Caleb exhaled slowly. The edges of a memory flicked through him. The shadow of a teammate standing on a ridge 6 years ago, the frost biting his gloves, the betrayal in his voice. The same teammate who disappeared after that mission. The same man believed dead. Atlas pressed his body into Caleb's leg, sensing the shift in his handler's breathing. The scent of a ghost Atlas suddenly stiffened, ears pricking, muscles tense. He turned toward the mountain ridge behind the tent and growled, a low, unsettled growl Caleb rarely heard. The dog's eyes fixed on a point far beyond the emergency vehicles, toward the tree line. Caleb followed his stare, but saw nothing except snow-covered branches swaying. Then, faintly, so faintly it could have been imagination, he caught the metallic click of a rifle bolt sliding into place. Atlas growled again, trembling, but not with fear. Recognition, as if he sensed a ghost from the past standing in the darkness watching them. Caleb straightened slowly, hand drifting toward his rifle, but the sound vanished, swallowed by the wind. Medics continued their tasks, unaware of the silent predator in the trees. He forced himself back into the tent. Mara, we're taking you somewhere safe. You'll have protection, food, warmth. Her lip quivered. You'll find Emmett, right? Caleb placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I will, I promise. As Mara was escorted to an ambulance, Caleb stepped away and opened his encrypted tablet, typing furiously into the federal private server. A file appeared. Emmett Collins. Priority watch. Caleb scrolled through the classified pages. Photos, school reports, and then the sensitive documents stamped with deep red ink. Emmett's father, Michael Collins, had been investigating Project Vesper before he vanished. And in his final logs, he mentioned something chilling. If they revive Phase 2, anyone with the V-mark genotype is at risk, including Emmett. Caleb rubbed his forehead, tension digging into the muscles of his jaw. He had served shoulder to shoulder with Michael, an honest, sharp-minded agent with a calm nature and a trimmed beard that framed his stern jaw. A man whose distrust of classified experiments came from witnessing one too many government programs go wrong. He had vanished during a joint operation right after telling Caleb, "If something happens to me, look after my boy." Caleb whispered under his breath, "I didn't look fast enough." Atlas nudged his side, grounding him back to focus. Minutes later, Deputy Sheriff Nora Hemsley arrived on scene, a 38-year-old red-haired woman with strong posture and the kind of facial lines, carved from years of uncompromising justice work. She wore a thick Vermont sheriff jacket, her badge slightly frosted from the cold. Nora's sharp green eyes narrowed as she surveyed the chaos. "Rowan," she said, stepping beside him, "tell me you finally got something solid." Caleb handed her the crate file. "Project Vesper. 7 kids. Emmett Collins is the target." Nora's expression hardened. "And the explosion?" "Intentional. Timed. Whoever did this knew we were closing in." She crossed her arms. "This feels too tactical for a trafficking group." Caleb nodded. "Because it is." Atlas growled again, faint but persistent. Nora noticed. "What's he smelling?" Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he advanced toward the northern side of the ridge, the spot where Atlas had focused earlier. Snow lay undisturbed except for a faint boot print partially covered by falling flakes. Caleb knelt and traced the edge. Military issue. Size 12. Slight toe drag, not a local, Not a typical trafficker, a professional. Nora approached behind him. You know him? Caleb stared at the print, his pulse tightening. I know the type. From his pocket, he removed the evidence bag holding the empty rifle casing found near the rescue site of the container children. The faint letters SU were scratched near the rim, almost erased. Nora's voice dropped. Spectre Unit. Caleb nodded once. Spectre Unit was a ghost squad, a black ops team so deep under the radar that even their failures never reached official records. Their members were ghosts, elite, trained to disappear. And one of them had once served in the same theater as Caleb, a man named Elias Crowler, sharp-eyed, lean, with slicked black hair and a scar under his chin from a mission in Kabul. Crowler had always been different, too quiet, too analytical, as if constantly calculating 3 moves ahead. He vanished 6 years ago during the same mission where Michael Collins died. Most believed Crowler dead. Caleb no longer did. He stood, clenching the casing in his gloved hand. Emmett isn't just a victim. He's leverage, or data, or both. Nora exhaled. And the other children? Alive. For now, they need 7. Nora closed her eyes briefly, the air leaving her lungs in a visible cloud. Where do we look? Caleb turned toward the dark stretch of forest beyond the emergency vehicles, farther north, toward the borderlands where abandoned government facilities rotted under decades of snow. The V camp, he said quietly. They're moving the kids there, and Emmett's already on his way. Atlas barked once, a short, firm sound, the kind he used when he understood their direction. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's back. Then we follow. Snow drifted over the ridge, settling on Caleb's shoulders as he held the Spectre casing under the glow of the sheriff's vehicle lights. The SU letters gleamed faintly before disappearing under the accumulating frost. Whoever had taken the children wasn't merely running a trafficking ring. It was something larger, colder, engineered, and whoever stood behind it had just left Caleb a signature. Spectre Unit was not dead, only sleeping. And now, they were awake again. Snow roared across the border woods like a living creature, clawing at Caleb Rowan's face as he pushed forward through the storm. Atlas trotted several steps ahead, the German shepherd's sable coat blending into the white chaos, except for the bright triangle on his chest that flashed every time lightning cracked above. The dog's nose worked relentlessly, following the faint chemical scent he had picked up near the container site, one that matched the sleep-inducing compound used by Spectre Unit years ago. Emmett Collins, wrapped in Caleb's spare jacket and clinging to his back earlier, was somewhere inside the ruins ahead. Caleb's breath turned to steam as he muttered to himself, "Hang on, kid. We're close." The abandoned facility rose from the ground like a concrete skeleton half buried by snowdrifts. Built in the Cold War era, Project Vesper's research station had once studied neurological conditioning on miners, an experiment long shuttered by the government. Now, its rusted gates stood partially open, swaying with metallic groans each time the wind surged through. The exterior walls were tagged with peeling hazard signs, warning of chemicals that had likely expired decades ago. Caleb checked the safety of his rifle, then crouched and moved in low, Atlas matching his posture as naturally as breathing. The facility's wide entrance swallowed them into a corridor as dark as the inside of a tomb. Caleb swept his flashlight across the walls, revealing old bulletin boards, torn hazard sheets, and door after door leading into abandoned labs. The air smelled of mildew and industrial rot, but beneath it lingered something newer: soap, sweat, the faint tang of fear. Atlas's ears perked suddenly, the dog freezing before taking a cautious step toward a hallway branching right. The tiles here were cracked, but fresh boot prints disrupted the dust. Caleb narrowed his eyes. The prints were heavy, uniform, and systematic, belonging to a lightly armored squad, likely the same black-suited team from earlier. "Spectre's ghosts," he whispered. As Atlas guided him deeper, the facility opened into a lower level, accessed by a stairwell that shuddered under their weight. The storm's howl was replaced by a stillness so absolute that even the hum of distant machinery seemed swallowed by the concrete walls. Atlas sniffed, then bounded suddenly toward a closed security door with an old keypad beside it. Caleb pressed his ear against the door. Faint breathing, small, rapid, terrified, came from within. After a tense moment evaluating the hinges and lock integrity, he jammed a multi-tool into the panel and ripped exposed wires free, shorting the mechanism. The door clicked open with a reluctant metallic sigh. Inside, a boy sat curled in the corner, shivering violently in a thin shirt. Emmett Collins. His brown curls were matted with sweat and frost, and his green eyes widened as he recognized the Marine's uniform. Are you with my dad's team?" he whispered, his voice cracking with hope and exhaustion. Caleb crouched, speaking gently. "I served with him. He's a good man, and you're safe now." Emmett's small hands trembled as he reached for Atlas, who leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against the boy's knee. Caleb lifted the boy carefully. Emmett was lighter than he expected, worryingly light, as if stress alone had worn him down. They moved quickly back toward the stairwell, but halfway up the lights flickered. Then the overhead PA system crackled to life with a static-laced voice. The tone wasn't human so much as automated, cold, clinical, devoid of emotion. "Sector B compromised. Initiating lockdown protocol." Caleb cursed under his breath and quickened his pace, but the corridor lights abruptly turned red, bathing everything in crimson shadows. Thick steel bulkhead doors began sliding from the ceiling, each one slamming down with a heavy thud. Atlas barked sharply, warning them to run faster. Caleb sprinted, tightening his grip on Emmett as the boy gasped and buried his face into Caleb's shoulder. They turned a corner, and the facility shuddered under what sounded like remote hydraulic systems adjusting. Caleb pressed his back against the wall, adjusting his hold on Emmett, while Atlas sniffed the air anxiously. That was when the dog growled, low, guttural, ancient, something Caleb had only heard twice in combat when death was near. From the far end of the corridor emerged 5 figures wearing black armor with matte helmets, their movements fluid and eerily synchronized. They bore no insignia, but their posture, their steps, and the way they scanned the room screamed elite training. Not mercenaries, not smugglers. Something closer to the vanished Spectre unit itself, a signal of something unseen. Atlas suddenly stopped growling and tilted his head, staring past the armored men toward a dark doorway behind them. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. Caleb followed the dog's line of sight, and for the briefest second, he saw a silhouette. A tall figure, clean posture, an air of authority radiating off him like heat. Then, he disappeared. Atlas whimpered softly, as if seeing a ghost from his training days. A handler he once trusted, or once feared. Something, or someone, deeper behind the operation. Caleb had no time to process the apparition. One of the armored men raised a weapon, a compact rifle fitted with a suppressor. Caleb ducked behind a support pillar. Emmett clutched to his chest as the first shots punched into the wall, sending chunks of concrete flying. "Atlas, smoke!" Caleb shouted. The shepherd reacted instantly to the command drilled into him during joint operations. He darted to Caleb's side, and Caleb slapped a smoke grenade into the ground, pulling Emmett close as gray plumes expanded. Through the smoke, he saw the shadows of the operatives adjusting formation, spreading out with precision practiced in countless operations. Caleb kicked open a nearby maintenance door and pushed Emmett inside. The room was lined with old chemical cabinets and a shattered observation window. Atlas followed last, teeth bared as he watched the smoke thicken. Caleb moved quickly, slamming the door shut with his shoulder, then locking it with a metal bar bolted into the floor. "We don't have long," he murmured as the door shuddered from the impact of boot kicks outside. Emmett clung to Caleb's jacket. "Are they the ones who took my dad?" Caleb paused, meeting the boy's eyes. Emmett's pupils were dilated with fear, but behind them flickered something else. Anger, the kind that grows inside a child, denied answers for too long. Caleb spoke honestly. I don't know. But they're the same kind of people he was fighting when he disappeared. Emmett nodded slowly, trying to be brave, his small jaw tightening in a way that reminded Caleb of Michael Collins himself. The doorframe groaned again as the men outside tried to cut through. Caleb scanned the room quickly, searching for any exit. Nothing. Just broken consoles, rusted valves, and old chemical drums. Then Atlas suddenly darted to the far wall and pawed furiously at a rusted grate. Caleb rushed over and found a sealed maintenance hatch hidden behind a collapsed shelf. "Good boy," he whispered. He yanked the grate off with a grunt, revealing a narrow service corridor beyond. Without hesitation, Caleb pushed Emmett through, then followed, Atlas slipping through last, and glancing back one last time as the main door finally gave way, with a horrifying metallic scream. The moment Caleb slammed the grate shut from the other side, flashlights spilled into the room they had just left, followed by the muffled voices of the armored team spreading out to search. The service corridor sloped upward, slick with frozen condensation. Atlas took the lead, his paws scraping lightly as he navigated the incline. Caleb carried Emmett again, the boy barely able to walk from exhaustion. Snowflakes drifted from vents in the ceiling, a sign they were climbing toward an exterior hatch. The facility shook once more, followed by a low, distant explosion, spectral, mechanical, final. Project Vesper was activating its self-destruction protocols. Caleb tightened his grip on Emmett. "We're running out of time." They climbed. Behind them, the research station groaned and collapsed inward as one of the lower wings detonated. Fire and freezing air clashed violently, sending a plume of smoke surging through the tunnels. The trio burst through a final hatch into the storm outside, snow blasting across the mountainside like a white river. They were alive, but barely ahead of the collapsing ruin behind them. Atlas nudged Emmett gently, guiding him toward a rock outcropping for cover. Caleb turned back, watching flames lick through the shattered windows of Project Vesper. The facility was burying itself, erasing evidence the way Spectre Unit had always done. Then he saw them, dark silhouettes on the ridge, watching from afar, unmoving against the snow. And then, one by one, they disappeared into the blizzard. Caleb's breath tightened. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Snow hammered the metal walls of the abandoned research facility as the emergency sirens finally fell silent, leaving behind an almost sacred quiet, one broken only by the ragged breathing of 3 souls who were still alive by a thread. Caleb Rowan held Emmett Collins tightly against his chest, the boy's thin frame trembling beneath Caleb's Marpat uniform. Atlas moved ahead, paws gliding across the concrete floor with instinctive precision, tail stiff, ears pointed forward. Outside, the blizzard raged, as if trying to bury every secret the mountains had witnessed. The corridor Atlas had dragged Caleb toward was narrower than the others, its walls lined with peeling technical schematics dated from the late Cold War years. Auxiliary ventilation axis, emergency maintenance route. Caleb read the faded stencil under his breath. It made sense that a trapped research staff would need a route to escape upward rather than downward. The air grew colder as they advanced, the scent of chemical smoke fading behind them, replaced by the sharper smell of frozen metal and old ventilation ducts. Emmett clung to Caleb's jacket with one small hand, the boy's green eyes wide but clearer than before, as though some faint part of him believed survival might actually be possible. Atlas stopped suddenly. His body lowered and he turned his head in a slow, deliberate motion, listening to something neither human could hear. Caleb froze. His breath fogged in front of him, hanging in the air like a fragile veil. Behind them, far in the facility depths, faint metallic echoing reverberated through the tunnels. Boots, coordinated, 4, maybe 6, moving with trained formation discipline, not the scattered chaos of traffickers. "This isn't over," Caleb murmured, tightening his hold on Emmett. Atlas growled quietly and pressed forward again, leading them through a rusted door and into a steep maintenance shaft. Metal rungs climbed upward into darkness. Caleb lifted Emmett onto his back, securing him gently with one arm, then began the ascent with slow and powerful movements. Atlas, agile as ever, climbed alongside on narrow service plates built along the shaft walls, each step quiet despite the clanging storm outside. Halfway up, the ladder vibrated. Someone else had entered the shaft. Caleb quickened his climb, muscles burning, breath sharp. Emmett buried his face into Caleb's shoulder. Atlas looked down, teeth bared. The echoes grew louder. Someone was climbing fast. They reached the upper hatch, and Caleb shoved it open with his free hand. A blast of frigid wind slammed into them, along with swirling snow so thick it swallowed the world in an instant. They emerged onto the mountainside, high above the tree line, where winter reigned with merciless authority. The hatch opened onto a narrow ledge carved into the rock, likely once used for external repair tasks by facility crew. The storm made everything look ghost-like, shapes dissolving into shifting. White. Caleb pressed Emmett against his chest as he stepped fully onto the ledge. Atlas shook snow from his coat and took point, nose down, tail rigid with determination. Below them, far down the slope, light flickered, orange, violent, rising. The facility. It was starting to self-destruct. A dull boom shook the mountain, followed by another. Black smoke pushed upward through the blizzard like a monster clawing toward the sky. The research base was erasing itself, exactly the method Spectre Unit used to sanitize their locations. No evidence, no bodies, no trails to follow. Caleb steadied his breath. They're burning everything. Atlas whined, turning toward a narrow gap between boulders. He pushed his body against it, forcing the snow aside before slipping through. Caleb followed, ducking to shield Emmett from the whipping wind. Beyond the gap, they found a slightly sheltered passage, a natural rock corridor sloping downward but still dangerously exposed. Snowstorms made the night blur, but Atlas moved with certainty, as though following a scent older than the storm itself. Caleb trusted him completely. They pressed onward, each step calculated, slow but determined. The wind screamed and swallowed sound, but the mountain under their feet remained solid, a reminder that nature held no allegiance to justice or evil. It simply existed, indifferent to the battles fought upon it. A sudden crack split the air. Sniper fire. A round shattered a rock inches from Caleb's shoulder, sending shards of stone spraying. He shielded Emmett instantly, dropping into a crouch while Atlas spun, barking with lethal intensity. Another shot struck the snow near Atlas's paws, and the dog leaped backward with practiced speed. The storm made visibility nearly zero, but a faint glint appeared far across the ridge, a scope reflection. Someone was still hunting them. "Spectre doesn't give up," Caleb muttered through clenched teeth. He fired back twice, quick and controlled, aiming more to suppress than kill. The scope reflection vanished. The sniper wasn't down, but he was repositioning. They needed to keep moving. Atlas nudged Caleb's hip and sprinted ahead again, guiding them toward a steep incline that sloped toward the lower trail. Caleb followed, half sliding, half running. Emmett's hands clutched Caleb's jacket tighter. "Are they going to take me back?" the boy whispered, voice trembling but aware. "No," Caleb answered firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." The slope led them into a small recess of rock, providing brief shelter. Caleb lowered Emmett onto a flat stone and checked the boy's condition. Pale, exhausted, but responsive, alive. Atlas sat beside them, chest heaving, ears swiveling constantly. Then something strange happened. The whisper in the storm. Atlas turned his head sharply to the right, staring into the white void with an intensity Caleb had rarely seen. His fur bristled, not from threat, but recognition. He took 3 slow steps toward the edge, nose trembling as though catching a scent impossible for the storm to carry. Emmett whispered, "He smells someone." Caleb felt the hair along his neck rise. The storm carried a faint echo, barely audible, but distinct. A voice, male, fragmented by the wind. Rowan, too late. Spectre, never ended? Caleb's breath stopped. He knew that voice. Michael Collins, Emmett's father. But Michael Collins had been declared dead 6 years ago. Atlas growled softly, as if confirming the impossible. Caleb tightened his grip on his rifle. We're not alone out here. The wind swallowed the voice as quickly as it came. The moment evaporated, replaced once again by the brutal task of survival. Caleb lifted Emmett, and they continued down the trail, the storm easing just enough for them to see distant lights flickering below, the flashing reds and blues of emergency vehicles climbing the access road. Civilization, safety, but not victory. They reached a clearing where the forest finally returned, trees swaying violently, snow coating the branches. The sounds of engines approached, police cruisers and an ambulance struggling through the drifts. Sheriff Nora Hemsley, a tall, fiery-haired woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense posture, burst from her vehicle the moment she saw them. Her uniform coat was dusted with snow, and the wind whipped her ponytail behind her like a red banner. "Rowan!" she shouted, running toward them. Her breath fogged in the frigid air, and her boots sank deep into the snow with each hurried step. "Holy Lord! Emmett?" Emmett reached for her with a weak hand, and she scooped him into her arms, cradling the boy's head gently against her shoulder, her expression breaking from steel into raw relief. "You did it," she whispered to Caleb. "You brought him back." Caleb didn't answer immediately. He was watching the mountain, watching the black smoke swirl upward from the collapsing facility. "It's not over," he said quietly. Atlas pressed against his leg, sensing Caleb's unease. A paramedic opened the ambulance doors. Caleb lifted Emmett inside, climbing in after him, while Atlas jumped up gracefully, curling beside the stretcher. As the doors closed, snow continued to fall, soft, steady, indifferent. Caleb's phone buzzed, an email, no sender, no subject, just a single line. "Today wasn't the end. Spectre unit never died, Rowan, and now they'll be coming for you." Caleb stared at the message long after the ambulance began its descent toward town. Emmett, still clutching Caleb's sleeve, didn't let go. Atlas kept watch by the door, eyes fixed on the storm outside. The mountain loomed behind them, hiding answers that refused to stay buried. And somewhere in the blizzard the truth breathed, waiting for its next move. In the quiet after the storm, when the snow settles and the world seems still again, we remember that every life saved carries the echo of a miracle. Some call it fate, others call it instinct. But those who have walked through darkness and found the light know it comes from somewhere higher than ourselves. In every narrow escape, in every act of courage, and in every moment when hope rises against all odds, there is the unmistakable touch of God moving through the world. Caleb, Atlas, and Emmett remind us that even when the night feels endless, there is always a hand guiding us forward. Sometimes that guidance comes through a loyal companion, sometimes through a stranger's kindness, and sometimes through the quiet whisper in our hearts telling us not to give up. God works through people, through moments, and through small signs we often overlook. As you go back to your own life, with its burdens, joys, responsibilities, and silent battles, remember this: you are not walking alone. The same grace that lifted them out of danger is the grace watching over you, your family, and everyone you love. May God protect you, give you strength in your hardest hours, and bless your home with peace. If this story touched you, helped you reflect, or reminded you of the light that still exists in this world, please share it so others can feel that hope too. Leave a comment, let us know your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel to keep walking this journey with us. May God bless every viewer listening to this now, and may His protection follow you wherever you go.